This is a story called The Little Monsters, Chapter 74. Stumpy becomes seriously ill. It's a school day and Stumpy has woken up feeling really unwell. At first his parents didn't believe him until he came downstairs, and then they could see that he was genuine. When his mum took his temperature, it was sky high, so she sent him back to bed and gave him some medicine, and then he went straight back to sleep. When he woke up he felt even worse, so his mum called the emergency doctor. When he came out, he said it was just a virus and gave him some medicine. After a few days he was well enough to go back to school. However, on his first day back he complained to Mrs. Applejack that he didn't feel well and that he had pain in his right side. She could tell by looking at him that he really wasn't well, so she took him to the school nurse. By the time he got there, the pain had worsened and he was literally rolling round on the floor screaming in pain. The nurse suspected that he had appendicitis, and he was rushed to hospital where it was confirmed that he did have appendicitis, and he was rushed into theatre. Thankfully the staff caught it just in time before his appendix burst. He had to stay in hospital for a week and then he was allowed to go home where he made a full recovery. However, about a month later Stumpy started feeling unwell again. His temperature was so high he was talking out of his head and he was covered in a rash all over his body. His mum called the emergency doctor, and when he came out he took one look at Stumpy and called an ambulance. On the way to the hospital, Stumpy almost died and he had to be resuscitated twice. When they got him there, they rushed him into intensive care as he'd slipped into a coma. They hooked him to a drip full of antibiotics and put him on a life support machine. His parents took it in turns to stay with him. The gang were allowed to visit him, but they had to wear gowns and masks. They were desperately worried about him and they didn't want to leave his side. Everyone at school knew about Stumpy and they knew how close the gang were. In assembly, Mr. Tinker gave each teacher a huge card for everyone to sign and write messages on for Stumpy. Mrs. Applejack could see that the rest of the gang were worried sick, and she asked Mr. Tinker if they could go in the woodwork room and make some toys for Stumpy, and she said yes. The woodwork teacher, Mr. Whippet, didn't have any classes that afternoon, but he stayed at school so that he could supervise and help the kids. Some of the other kids asked if they could make some toys for Stumpy too, and the staff agreed. When everyone had finished their toys, they wrapped them up and the gang took them to his house for when he was well enough to receive them. He was still in a coma, but he was stable. However, one day his parents were visiting him when he suddenly started fitting and then he flatlined. Thankfully, the staff managed to bring him back and stabilise him again. A few days later he started showing signs of improvement, but then he took a turn for the worse again. After a week in hospital, Stumpy was still in a coma. He was still seriously ill and he was still on a life support machine. After he'd been in hospital for about 10 days, his fingers and toes started going black. Excuse me. The doctors told his parents that if they got any worse, they may have to amputate them. Thankfully, they didn't get any worse, much to everyone's relief. After Stumpy had been in hospital for 2 weeks, he was still no better and he was still on the life support machine. On the 3rd week, Stumpy suddenly started fitting and flatlining again. The rest of the gang decided that they wanted to make some video memories of themselves playing tricks on people to play for Stumpy, hoping that they might help him to recover. They told their parents and the teachers at school about their plan and they thought it was a really good idea. Mrs. Tinker announced in assembly about what the gang were planning to do, and she asked if anyone would like to join in. Over the next couple of days, during playtimes and lunchtimes, everyone took part in making videos for Stumpy and sending in video messages. When they'd finished, the gang took the videos to the hospital and the staff gave them permission to play them as much as they liked. After a couple of days, there was no change. However, on the third day of playing the videos, Stumpy suddenly smiled and opened his eyes. He tried to speak, but he couldn't because of the tube down his throat. The doctors took the tube out and took him off the life support machine. After that, he seemed to be getting better, but a few days later he took a turn for the worse again. Thankfully, it was just a chest infection, nothing else. After that, he went from strength to strength, and after 6 weeks in hospital, he was well enough to go home. After he'd been home for 2 weeks, he made a full recovery, and he was well enough to go back to school. With a bit of help from the teachers and the other kids, he soon caught up with the work he'd missed. Excuse me. However, after he'd been back at school for a week, he started to feel ill, and he was rushed to hospital as a precaution. Thankfully, it was just a virus, and he was sent home with antibiotics. After that, he was absolutely fine, and it didn't take him long to get back to his normal self. He started playing pranks on people again. One day he threw a stink bomb across the school playground. Then he pinched Kicker's crisps and hid them so she couldn't find them. Pinched Mrs. Applejack's bum, put whoopee cushions on everyone's seats, and put his PE shorts on top of his trousers. The next day he had swimming, and he jumped into the pool wearing his PE kit, making everyone laugh, including the staff. Thankfully, he didn't have PE that day. The other days he took Stampy's packed lunch and hid it. He took Kicker's PE kit and put her shorts on his head. He then went round putting pink cushions on everyone's seats. He let his toy rats go in the dinner hall, causing everyone to scream. When Mrs. Tinker told him to pack it in and to behave himself, he said yes, miss, and then pinched her bum as she walked away, making everyone laugh. As you can imagine, everyone was glad that he was back to normal after he'd been through as you can imagine, everyone was glad that he was back to normal after he'd been so ill for so long. End of chapter 74. Thanks for watching, guys. Sorry about the hair, but I'm trying to grow my fringe out, but the less said the better. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.